Before we start, it's great to see people share their creations in comments, but it's very limiting for my responses and you since most people might not see your amazing ideas. So I encourage you to join the Discord. There's a link below and I hope to see you there. Also, thank you to the amazing artists who've submitted their creatures for this video. If you want the chance to be featured, then definitely join the Discord. Now, onto the video. The first part discussed fire creature biology, while this one will cover topics that didn't fit the general data of the first, and showcase designs based on previously established categories. So I suggest you go watch the first one. If you want to skip to the designs, timestamps are available as usual. But first, we'll discuss some fun design tidbits, starting with underwater fires. Fire typically can't start underwater since water cuts oxygen from it, preventing a continuous blaze. But nature isn't so simple as to allow a weakness without any workarounds. Again, I've divided the info I have into 3 categories: reactive, kinetic, and aerate. Reactive is basically chemical combination from the last video, but I didn't want to reuse the title. I will then further divide this category into wet and dry reactions. Wet reactions, or its scientific term, hydrolysis, are reactions that require water as a reactant. There are many byproducts from different chemicals, but will only focus on combustion. We can achieve this in 2 different ways, using alkali metals or electrolysis. Alkali metals are called so because the reaction with water forms alkalis. These alkalis are soluble in water and great at neutralizing acids. But again, combustion is our main focus. I've ordered the metal reactions from weakest to strongest. And though francium hasn't been tested due to its 22-minute half-life and radioactivity, it is theoretically the strongest. These metals displace hydrogen from the water and bond them to a hydroxide molecule, creating metal hydroxides. The reaction is exothermic, which means it releases heat. That heat then ignites the displaced hydrogen. In addition to providing hydrogen, metal hydroxides like sodium and potassium hydroxide are highly corrosive due to their high pH level, but only in high concentrations and amounts. The iceworm in Subnautica has a horn with chambers filled with alkali metals and grooves that filter water into the horn as it burrows. The alkali metal and water reaction heats its horn to help it dig through the ice much faster. The pros of this method is that ignition is not instantaneous. A thin layer of hydroxides needs to decay before the alkali metal is exposed to water, giving ample time for the user to escape the area before it ignites. Metals like lithium, sodium, and potassium are also less dense than water, allowing them to float instead of sink. All alkali metals are also incredibly soft, ensuring easy acquisition and processing. The cons is that storage is going to be complicated. Alkali metals are typically kept in kerosene oil to prevent combustion, since it prevents their reaction with oxygen and moisture in the air. It also wouldn't function like an actual fire breath would. The fire is much more similar to a series of small explosions until the fuel is used up by the reaction. This reaction also releases so much hydrogen that the metal is actually moved around by the bubbles being produced. Along with the density or lack thereof of some of these metals, they would also float upwards. Additionally, if the reaction lacks heat, which is the case for cesium due to the reaction splitting the metal into smaller pieces that don't get hot enough, and oxygen, which is the case for all of them, the produced hydrogen doesn't explode and only floats to the surface as bubbles. Lastly, due to their reactivity, these metals are never found naturally in their pure elemental form, so a biological filter such as a kidney or liver analog would be required for this method. So yeah, it doesn't technically work underwater. I just wanted to give you all more info on this extremely unique method of generating fires. And I already put too much work into the research for this part, so if I suffer, you do too. But if you want a process that gets around these issues, then you can also generate hydrogen from water through electrolysis, a process where an electric current is passed through a substance to effect a chemical change. Placing electrodes in water attracts the positively charged hydrogen to the cathode and the negatively charged oxygen to the anode, building up in a 2-to-1 ratio. Using electric eels as a reference, their heads are positively charged while their tails are negative. So oxygen would build up by the head and hydrogen on the tail. But the reaction weakens if the electrodes are too far apart, so keep both ends close, maybe by using extended structures like the amp eel in Subnautica. This method generates everything you'd need for a fire except the spark, which already exists as the electrical charge if a strong pulse is released after filtration. Many things can influence this process. Hotter water increases electrolyte conductivity and starts the process much quicker, lowering energy demand. Adding more electrolytes like salt can also help. There are four major large-scale hydrogen production methods with different benefits and disadvantages. Firstly, we have alkaline water electrolysis, which adds alkaline electrolytes like sodium and potassium hydroxide into the water. Mixing electrolysis and the alkali method earlier makes electrolysis happen at lower temperatures, but has limited electrical current densities, making it unable to function in large areas of water, and has low operating pressure issues which affects efficiency. Secondly, we have PEM electrolysis, which employs a PEM, or proton exchange membrane, between the electrodes, which is usually made of specific polymer types to increase hydrogen yield. Using the ampule example from earlier, you can add a specialized filtration fin between the electrodes similar to a PEM. Thirdly, solid oxide electrolysis utilizes solid oxide materials. The electrodes in this method are special ceramic conductors made of nickel or yttria stabilized zirconia, which more efficiently produces ultra-pure hydrogen but requires higher temperatures and pressures, utilizes water in the form of steam, is unstable, and the resulting hydrogen degrades pretty quickly. Lastly, we have microbial electrolysis, which introduces microbes into organic matter, commonly acetic acid, to release hydrogen ions. It requires less voltage compared to normal water electrolysis, but is still under development and is lacking in hydrogen production rate. Each one is unique, but I urge you to research them for yourself. I have a link to a research paper in the description if you're curious. So electrolysis requires a constant electrical discharge. Otherwise, fuel creation is inefficient, demanding more energy than it's worth. So if you don't want your creature to rely on water, then maybe go for dry reactions. Dry reactions are exactly like chemical combination from the last video, where instead of using water as a reactant, they react with each other and just so happen to work underwater. Flares utilize oxidizers like sulfates, chlorates, or nitrates to provide oxygen, reducing agents, metals like magnesium and aluminum that react with the oxidizers to release heat and light, fuel in the form of charcoal, sulfur, or sawdust, and a binder to hold them all together. Underwater flares utilize magnesium and aluminum due to their reactivity, and potassium nitrate for its superior oxidizing properties. These flares also have a higher ratio of oxidizer to fuel compared to open-air flares, due to the lack of oxygen underwater. And though I've classified this as a dry reaction, it can also be a wet reaction since magnesium's reactivity allows it to harvest oxygen from the water, generating hydrogen and magnesium oxide. So a magnesium torch could last a while if magnesium's decay is slow, but slow isn't what we'd want for the next method. Kinetic refers to fires that result from sheer speed. Meteors and rockets entering your atmosphere create heat through friction due to the presence of gas molecules. And just like air, water is also a bunch of molecules, so it makes sense that some creatures would take advantage of this, like flying in it or summoning the sun with nothing more than a snap. Pistol shrimp claws have a water-filled socket in the immobile part of their claw, called the propus. The water in this socket is pushed out by the plunger when the claw snaps. This is done so quickly that it creates a low-pressure area, forming cavitation bubbles that can travel at 62 miles per hour. This bubble slowly collapses, and when it finally does, it results in a quick flash of light, a shockwave, sounds that can reach 210 decibels, which is louder than most firearms, and heat that can reach 4,800 degrees Celsius, almost as hot as the surface of the sun, albeit for a short time. The shrimp uses this bubble beam to stun their prey from a short distance, which feels like overkill considering the shrimp is no bigger than your hand. Despite their size, the bubbles they make are so loud they can interfere with sonar. The US Navy in World War II hid from Japanese hydrophones by using nearby pistol shrimp as an acoustic screen. But if you think a pinch is too delicate, then why not try a punch? Mantis shrimp, which aren't shrimp, but Mantis tomatopod doesn't sound as cool, have a specialized boxing claw that they keep locked in, building up energy. When they're ready to strike, they release a latch, transferring the stored energy to the club, making it travel at 50 miles per hour. An extremely powerful attack on its own, but when this jab connects, it also creates a cavitation bubble, punching twice in one hit, first with the claw, then with the bubble, releasing light, a shockwave, heat around 4,400 degrees Celsius, and a sound that reaches 200 decibels. Both these methods don't sound like usual fire, but as I said in a previous video, rapid combustion only results in heat and light, while explosions have the bonus of producing sound and a shockwave. These shrimp strikes count, but they're only possible underwater, not air, which is the main component of our next method. Despite the name, this method is the least fancy. If there's no oxygen, bring some yourself. No chemicals needed, no fancy gimmicks like super speed, just pure O2 brought separately by the organism. Underwater blowtorches have 3 exit nozzles that release acetylene or hydrogen, pure oxygen, and air. The acetylene and oxygen are mixed to keep the flame going, while the air forms a protective bubble around it using a special ring exit, being expelled at high pressures to combat the pressure being exerted by the water. Make sure that the air bubble doesn't whistle though, or else you can get arrested. Outside of water, rockets have the same mechanism using liquid oxygen to keep their fire going, and since they don't have to fight against water pressure, they don't require an air bubble. Before we discuss fire colors, I'd like to add that your fuel may come in two forms, soluble or insoluble, meaning they can either dissolve in water or not. And while most forms of fuel, like hydrogen, are partially soluble in water, you can opt for insoluble fuel like oil, creating walls of fire that block the surface or leaving biological sea mines that can ignite later are interesting concepts. With that said, let's move on to colors. We're all aware of temperature's influence on fire color, with red being the coldest and blue being the hottest. But we can go beyond these temperature-locked colors by adding a sprinkle of magic. And by magic, I mean chemicals. I won't discuss all of them since there's a lot, and most results are on Google anyway, so I'll discuss some fire types that don't show up when you search fire colors. First, a warning. These colors, from the cursed wisp green of barium to the enticing subscribe button red of strontium, the chemicals that bring life to these flames can also drain it from the user. To clarify, they're toxic and can cause problems when ingested. Toxicity isn't often visible, but still poses a threat, just like our first fire type, invisible fires. These fires are a result of using fuel like ethanol and methanol, which are clear burning, extremely hot, and don't produce any smoke. Under darkness, they look like any other fire, but once sunlight hits firelight, it vanishes. White fires can be made using magnesium or any of its derivatives like Epsom salt, or simply making the temperature of the flames around 1300 to 1500 degrees Celsius. On the opposite side of the spectrum, black fires, while not technically possible, since fire transmits light, and to make it black it needs to absorb light instead, can be achieved by using a light source that is monochromatic, or only releases one type of light wave. Something like a sodium vapor lamp would do nicely. The basic process is that neon gas inside the lamp heats up to a point where the sodium metal gets vaporized. These sodium atoms then get ionized, resulting in the release of light. Though the lamp by itself doesn't result in a black flame, we still need to add sodium or salt water to the fire since it absorbs the same light waves being emitted by the lamp, finally allowing the color to change. Additionally, some compounds can give your fire some aesthetic modifications. Sugar can create fire sparks or small explosions, while a dash of flour, fats, or oils can create flare-ups in your fire. I'd like to add that chemicals can change existing flames in many ways. Pure oxygen obviously increases a fire's heat, while substances like sulfur dioxide make the smoke they produce much more toxic, adding yet another layer to fire creature diversity. What chemicals can't do though is design a creature. That's our job. There aren't requirements or restrictions when designing a specific elemental creature. You can make it look like it would have the element at first glance, or have characteristics not related to it at all. Any design is fair game. Though elements like fire, as some in the comments have pointed out, would need some bright warning of their element before using it, like many poisonous animals being brightly colored, or even aggressive behavior, so things would learn to stay away without them using their element. But again, you don't necessarily need to do that as well. These restrictions mostly apply to more realistically designed creatures. Expulsion-wise, you can make a classic fire breather, but we can do much better than that. As mentioned in the first video, many glands can be modified to expel fire. The monstrous nightmare from How to Train Your Dragon excretes a kerosene-based gel to coat their skin, which they set on fire, possibly possessing the same skin glands as a poison dart frog. It doesn't have to be limited to that kind of conventional thinking too. The iceworm from earlier is a good example of unique fire usage. While not utilizing the blaze itself, the heat is still a byproduct of a fire produced by the creature. Of course, I won't be able to list every unique way fire can be implemented or expelled, so I'm just here to encourage you to use more unorthodox methods, and I'm sure your imagination can make up for that. Or the imagination of the artists who've submitted their creatures for this video. Ladies and gents, I am excited to announce the first creature feature. Thank you again to the people who've submitted their creatures for me to showcase. These designs are based on the categories I listed in the previous video, so again, go watch it. Our first category is internal chemical combination, with first place going to Dan ABC and their blast bugs. These creatures live for 60 years, are 6.5 feet long and 5 feet tall. Initially earthworm-like creatures born from a clutch of 4 to 6 eggs, with face tentacles and soft head shells that harden into pincers and armor as they mature. In this stage, they are cared for by their parents, with females having more delicate pincers for this task. As adults, they sport dense muscles and chitin-like armor on their face, making them incredibly durable. But for the rest of their body, they gather rocks to act as armor and camouflage similar to a bagworm. Due to their density, they are pretty slow, but are incredibly adept at digging by using their pincers. This digging ability is especially useful in their home environment of caves and cliffs, with an affinity for temperatures at 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Their homes provide the rock they use for defense and sustenance, possessing multiple stomach compartments like a cow and strong muscles to break down and digest the rock. Ores can be eaten but not digested, so the metal is filtered in a twisting motion and remains at the bottom of the first gut, while the digestible material moves on to the second gut. The second gut not only houses the processed rocks, but also combustible pressure-sensitive vapor, which they can ignite by compressing their stomach and increasing the pressure, causing a spray of rocks and metal slag to shoot from their mouths like a biological shotgun. However, this ability is only available to individuals who are 10 years of age and used sparingly since it costs them food. The life cycle, design, and visualization of the processes were a major factor in this creature winning. Plus, it looks like a very dangerous and angry version of Snom. For second place, we have Lamppost and their wonderfully drawn thermonuclear-powered flying kaiju reminiscent of Valstrax, aptly named the Arrowhead, a rarely seen solitary hunter close in size to a small commercial plane, using its Mach 3 speed and a thickly layered skull to ram its prey. For third, we have Evaro with their Sunbringers, a eusocial bird species with two types of individuals. The Emperor, a female who creates microsuns, which are a dark red pellet resembling a common kata berry, formed from potassium-rich Ceriatu sap with a water-soluble coating that hardens when in contact with keratin, but dissolves in water and exposes the potassium center, which then explodes after 5 minutes. The second type is the aggressive conscripts, which act as both defenders and workers, gathering food and consuming microsuns to deter threats by sacrificing themselves for the nest. Moving on to environmental chemical combination, first place goes to Kitsu and their cannon snail. Volcano-dwelling snails similar to the scaly-foot gastropod, but just as dangerous as its habitat. Their shells are specialized to store and produce chlorine trifluoride gas, or ClF3. This gas is extremely reactive and can convert water into oxygen. ClF3 is also so reactive that it requires a special metal container of treated nickel, which is what their shells are made of. They shoot this gas far from themselves to create a fiery hellscape. To survive this, they shoot argon gas from an exit on the top of their shells called a death hole to create a shield preventing the chemical reaction from coming too close. In case this fails, they can choose to either die or retract into their shell and empty the remaining gas reservoir to shoot themselves away from the vicinity, which is just as likely to kill them but provides a better chance at survival. Their volcanic habitats provide them not only with minerals like salt and nickel to refuel their blasts, create their scaly armor, or shell outcrops they can eat later, but also the heat to convert the fluorine and chlorine into ClF3. Due to these processes, their vital organs are found in their foot instead of their shell. They are also so dangerous that the safety manual says, and I quote, "See a shell, run like hell." This particular entry and the research that went into the ClF3 gas and the argon force field really stood out to me and propelled it to first place. For second, we have the Murox from Wormish Carp, a fire-burping beast using the antifreeze of an oily fire plant to mix with its stomach acid, creating a flammable gas. A muscular section of the throat catches and compresses this gas until it reaches ignition temperature and is released into the throat to ignite and be burped through the nose to help the ox melt ice and snow to forage for more food. Third, we have Stefan and their entire food web of creatures. But the main focus of this entry is the omnivorous Pyrus child, with males twice as large as an average human, possessing 2 pairs of eyes, shield-like wings not used for flight, a spiky tail releasing oil that combusts when in contact with oxygen, and 5 to 6 cranial plates used in mating rituals. Females are much smaller and have 2 gas reserves under a dorsal spike that mix into a flame and a more agile blade-tipped tail compared to their male counterpart. Next up, we have mechanical ignition with the most submissions so far. First place going to Flick Arts and their Firuga. This dessert-resembling amphibian secretes a flammable glycerine-based substance from its skin, which it ignites using its sulfur-rich tusks. It often leaves traces of this slippery substance on other plants and living entities. They are incredibly territorial and commonly cause forest fires due to their aggression. Its volcanic habitat ensures that the plants and soil it consumes are rich in sulfur, so much so that it's enough to fortify their bones and refuel their glands constantly. After ignition, they shed their skin to prevent further damage and to confuse predators, though this shedding behavior leaves them vulnerable until they regrow their hide, leading them to burrow and hide after doing so. Second place goes to I Have the High Ground and their Flint Hair. These social gravel basin-dwelling pharabeasts are covered in flammable honey and minerals that are ignited into a ball of flame when they strike themselves against ore deposits to act as defense or smoke out city beehives, which are their main food source. Third is Tato and their Ashhopper, bugs that resemble grasshoppers but with vibrant flame-colored wings and the ability to rub their legs at such a speed that it generates a loud screeching sound and can kindle foliage, which they use as a source of warmth in bizarre mating ritual gatherings that take place in the winter. A different type of ignition method is electrical ignition, of which we have 2 submissions. Coming in first place is Hydra and their Vephid. Based on woolly aphids, these arthropods excrete a waxy substance on their body used to deter predators and build up static electricity. They also possess methane-producing microorganisms in their digestive tract, which they store in a special gland and release from their backs. These two adaptations seem ordinary on their own, but a third ingredient comes to play: the babao flower, a strange fruiting body containing the seeds of the babao plant that looks like bubbles made of a rubber-like material. The Vephids have formed a symbiotic relationship with this plant, entering the flower and holding the insides using its legs. The Vephid then releases methane and uses its static charge to ignite the gas and keep hot air inside the flower, causing it to float, while using its fire-retardant wax coat as a shield. This method of transportation brings Vephids to new areas and allows the flower to spread its seeds, ensuring benefits for both species. The idea of this hot air balloon making bug caught me off guard like the rest of the self-destructive submissions, but in a good way. A lot of thought clearly went into this, and I like just how silly it sounds when taken out of context. Second place goes to Bug and their Kindle Slug. The spicy-colored Highland Slug uses its slime to coat pyrophytic pine cones before releasing an electrostatic charge from its lower head tentacles to ignite it, melting the resin of the cone and exposing seeds for the slug to eat. We're close to the end with the next category: Instantaneous Ignition, with only one submission: the Aquila solis, or sun eagle, coming from Parzival. Possessing sweat glands that excrete salt, water, and ethanol, stemming from an abundance of yeast in their system, they can ignite this mixture either by striking their mineral-rich claws against specific rocks to create sparks, or the much cooler method of flying to heights of 10,000 to 30,000 feet and diving downwards. Their top speeds can reach 2,000 miles an hour, building up pressure and igniting the ethanol. This flame coating does not affect the eagle since the ethanol burns off much faster than the water can evaporate. Despite this magical display, there are myths surrounding this bird, such as having the ability to heal any wound using its tears. Whether true or not, it is almost impossible to catch and illegal to hunt in many parts of the world, which makes proving the myth quite difficult. For the surprise category, we have Cohen and their Pembecaran, an omnivorous rodent that inhabits forests to grasslands in groups of 5 to 10 individuals, foraging for berries, fruits, plants, and insects. They decorate themselves with plant material. This foliage intertwines with long sturdy hair to dry it and provide a warm core for bacteria to grow in. This was initially for camouflage, but has now evolved into its signature weapon. The temperature within the core eventually reaches ignition, leading to spontaneous combustion, which can be impacted by improper weaving and water, so they are very water avoidant. Their foliage piles are also meant to attract mates, with large enough piles to be appealing, but not enough to combust much quicker. Once a herd has large enough piles, and when the females are ready to give birth, they begin to hunt by basically committing arson and feeding off the remains or wounded animals in the ash. This can sometimes be carried out in coalitions of multiple herds reaching 30 individuals, in the end supplying the offspring with full meals. To wrap this all up, we have those who manage to make water-related fires in line with the processes I've discussed today. For alkali metals, we have the blunderbuss cardinal fish from Angie feeds on prey with indigestible crystalline armor that its digestive system filters for sodium by using controlled electrical currents. It spits this sodium from a sac in its mouth to flash or burn enemies. Electrolysis-wise, we have two entries with different ways of executing the same method. Alter's Death Spinner is a swamp-dwelling ambush hunter that uses internal electrolysis to fill its tail with hydrogen gas to ignite by rattling and send itself spinning through the air at 30 meters per second, or 67 miles per hour. And Kitsu again with an abyssal leviathan that hunts by creating a controlled charge from its mouth to generate hydrogen and cause an explosion. And last but not least, Carp with their firecracker shrimp mix chemical reaction and kinetic into one method by filtering oxygen and methane into their claws before snapping them at incredible speeds. Once again, thank you to the artists and their willingness to provide their abilities for this video. If you weren't chosen, these are very subjective picks, and the competition was very hard to sift through, so don't feel discouraged, especially since I read every single one of these entries, which I'm showing right now. I might need to redo the ruling system though, since I read basically a research paper's worth of biology and design notes, along with downloading a lot of doc files, but this was a fun first time experiment, especially reading through a bunch of those notes like this one and this one. My voice may not show it, but I really like each design and the thoughts that got put behind them. All very unique, very personal takes. Made me realize I'm not alone in this nerdy niche of creating random creatures. Speaking of being alone in a niche, I'm clearly not, since we've gone from 2K to 16K subs in a few months after the release of my second video. Thank you so much. I appreciate everyone subbing, commenting, and joining the Discord just to share their thoughts and personal projects. It's so nice to find a community just as passionate in this type of stuff with their own creations. If you're curious to see the full description of these creatures, you can join the Discord and read up on the creators' thoughts, which I encourage you do. But if not, that's fine. I apologize for the long release of this video since there were many factors that got involved, which I can't really explain. But yeah, that's about it. Thank you for watching this, and if you want to watch the bloopers, stick around. But if not, best of luck out there. While this one will cover topics that didn't fit the general. This one will cover topics that didn't fit the general. This one will cover topics that didn't fit the general data. This one will. Fuck. This one will cover topics that didn't fit the general data. This one will cover. I can't. These alkalis are soluble. That heat then ignites the displaced oxygen. Hydrogen. Metal hydroxides like sodium and potassium hydrogen. There are 4 electrolytes. It results in a quick flash of light. No, what the fuck? The shrimp uses this boat. Why do I keep stringing words together that I can't speak? Keep locked in. No. Oh man, that's gonna ruin the edit. Oh fudge. Yep, I'm adding that. These shrimp strikes. Why did I make it so hard? But other than using blah tongue twist. But other than using well, but other than using but other than using but other than using but other than using oh, fuck, I'll just cut that off. Fire going, and since they don't fuck, I just just had a stroke. Rock. From the cursed wisp. From the cursed wisp. From the cursed wisp green. For second place, we have lamppost, and they're wonderfully a rarely seen solitary. They shoot this gas from far. From far? The babao. Babao? Bubao. Buba.